So recently, after the release of 1146, people have likened Gunko's regenerative abilities to those we see of the Five Elders in Egghead, saying that all of these regenerative abilities come from the same source in the Mark of the Abyss, which most likely has something to do with Emu. However, I don't think this is the case because the details here are very important, and the various characters that we do see regenerate in very different ways. With that being said, I'm going to go over why I think each regeneration has nothing to do with the Mark of the Abyss or Emu at all, and they're all based in the individual Devil Fruit abilities of these separate characters. So, starting from the top, we have Gunko. Gunko has the ability of the Arrow Fruit based on Saul's description of the arrows. Even though they can vary in density, the default texture of them is like cloth. Therefore, Gunko in a way is a mummy. So, the funny thing about the chapter in which Gunko is attacked by Usopp, which is chapter 1146, is that no person right here has ever seen Katakuri fight. The only person who knows the details of how Katakuri's abilities work is Luffy. So none of them would actually know what's going on here because it's the first time they've ever seen a power like this. With that being said, why did I bring up Katakuri? Well, like I have said in other videos, I think Gunko is a special paramecia because she has very similar abilities to that of Katakuri, as well as many other characters. I did a big video on that. Go check that out. But the important thing here is that much like the genesis of this technique with Trable and the perfecter of the technique with Katakuri, Gunko is doing the same thing. What I mean is that she, using her arrow fruit abilities, has generated a body of armor of herself in which she can move around in said armor to dodge attacks. Also, said armor, perhaps much like Katakuri, could have infinite space, so she can hide in any part of the armor. We know that these armors likely have a lot of space within them due to Katakuri being able to pull out his trident Mogra from his arm. And no, he never changes Mogra into Mochi, as when he pulls it out his arm, it doesn't do any sort of animation or discoloring in which it's turning from Mochi into wood or metal or something like that. It simply comes out of his arm. So, for all intents and purposes, he never transforms his trident into Mochi, meaning that it was always in his arm, fully unaffected from the start of the fight. With that being said, Gunko here is very interesting because as she regenerates from being bisected while her body is filling in, it looks as though she's made out of cloth, because in the way that her body is filling in, she looks like her body is composed of burning fibers that are now filling back in piece by piece, which is very on brand for the arrow fruit because the basic constructs of the fruit are made out of some sort of cloth-like material. With that being said, when we talk about the Five Elders, even though their bodies fill in, it's distinctly different from what we see from Gunko, because when their bodies fill in, it's as if they're made of flesh and their regeneration is being aided by the same wispy energy that the Hagoromo is composed of. So with that being said, this is the case for all of the elders except one, that being Jupiter, because I think everybody but Jupiter, before, Saturn dies and is replaced by Garling, I think everybody here is a mythical Zoan except for Jupiter. However, there's the rub, because as discussed in a previous video of mine, there are differences between mythical Zoan. They aren't all created equal, because If you have a black Hagoromo, you're just a beast, a mythical beast, but you don't have any divinity. If you have a white Hagoromo or a lightly colored Hagoromo, you are most likely a divine beast or a divine entity of some sort. Say like the three that we have in the series now, so Luffy, Killingham, and Yamato. With that being said, too, what is Jupiter if not a mythical Zoan? I think he's either an ancient Zoan or a normal everyday Zoan, depending on how sandworms are treated in the One Piece world, because they're just imos from D&D in the real world. So I don't know what that entails of in One Piece. They could be like a weird sea king like creature. They could have inhabited like a sandy island like Alabasta. I don't know. But the important thing to look at here is the reason why Jupiter should be regarded as different from the other five elders, because in chapter 1111, shortly after he was beheaded by Brocky and Dory, we see his beheaded body behind the giants and Luffy. However, the wound caused by them is not affected by the wispiness of the Hagoromo. Therefore, that leads me to believe that his regeneration is effectively different from Saturn's and Nosjiro's, because he, in fact, is not a mythical creature. Therefore, his regeneration has to happen in a different way. It's most likely, based on him keeping up with the rest of them, just as effective as theirs based on the physiology of him being a worm, but it is different. Now, with that being said, there is a great divide when talking about Zoans, even those who are awakened, because even though we don't know the specifications of what happens when an ancient Zoan awakens, so far we know, one, all normal animals who are awakened Zoans and awakened properly don't seem to have different abilities apart from those who have failed their awakening, because Lucy, in the way that we see him in combat, is very much the same as he was back in the day, just stronger, and his regenerative abilities are no different than the ones we see in the Jailer Beast and Impel Down, because it's not even so much as it is regen, it's more so just heightened endurance. Now, the same thing goes for Kaku, as he too is a normal Zoan. But when we get into mythical Zoans, something very interesting happens, because not all mythical Zoans are created equal, and I talk about this in another video, because right now, as far as we know, there are only 3 fruit users in the series who have divine Devil Fruits, meaning they have the powers of some sort of divine entity. Those being Killingham with his Dragon Fruit model Kirin, Yamato with her Dog Fruit model Akuchi no Mikami, and Luffy with the Human Fruit model Nika. With that being said, I don't know how regeneration particularly goes with those who are divine, as none of these characters have been injured in a fatal way just yet. We do have a very interesting gag with Luffy in chapter 1111, in which scars and other effects on his body just kind of fall off and he pops them back on as if they were stickers. I don't know if that's considered regeneration or not, but that would be certainly something I would look out for in the future when Luffy is in fights. The same thing goes for Yamato, and the same thing goes for Killingham, though I do think in this arc in particular, we're going to see just how far regeneration goes with both Luffy and Killingham, seeing as how both of them seem to be divine. But I do think mythical Zoans, like the rest of the 5 elders minus Jupiter, do have the ability to regenerate in the way that we see, say, Saturn, Warcry, and Nosjiro regenerate, in which the Hagoromo is actually helping piece them back together even after fatal blows happen, or even minuscule blows, which leads me to believe that there is a set of difference between a mythical awakened Zoan and a normal awakened Zoan. Because in chapter 1111, when we see Lucy, he still is carrying all the wounds he has been given by Zoro, even when he transforms back into his human state. So his regeneration is seemingly non-existent. It's just endurance, like I said. But when a similar thing happens to Top Man Warcry as a pig and his tusk is broken by Emmett, said tusk regenerates shortly afterward. So I said to say, mythical Zoans on a grand scale have superior regeneration to that of normal Zoans and possibly ancient Zoans. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Works It!